Hello and welcome to Business Today Television. I'm Siddharth Zarabi and you're watching Easynomics. With me on the show today, a very special guest, Mr. Tarun Bajaj, the Union Revenue Secretary, and someone who is responsible for how much taxable and non-taxable income you have. Mr. Bajaj, as always, welcome to Business Today TV. Before I start, I must offer compliments to the headlines that you keep getting and generating from the department, which is buoyant tax collections. Do those headlines make you happy in this current year?
First of all, thank you for having me on your channel. These headlines, if they come, I think that is the work of both the CBDT and CBIC that they are doing. I'm only conveying what good work they are doing. Obviously, it motivates us, it makes us happy, and also it's the need of the hour for the country. We have to get out of COVID. We've got out of COVID to a large extent. So buoyant revenue is an essential part, which I'm happy that these two departments have been able to fill.
What is responsible for this buoyant revenue? Because there is obviously an element of the growth element that comes in, plus there is obviously a better system which the tax department has put in over the last several years. What would you describe this growth to?
So I would say there are basically three factors. One, during COVID, the economy went down. So the economy is coming back, it's bumping back. So that is a result of that. But our revenues have grown much higher than what the GDP has grown on a nominal basis, which means it's just not the real growth and the inflation that has carried the revenues to the direction that they have reached, but also the fact that we have had a much better compliance in the last 2 years, both on direct taxes and indirect taxes, and use of technology, AI and ML tools by the department have really helped us in getting this revenues. And now we see a larger number of people paying more revenues than what they were doing earlier. So that's a good sign. And the third, I think, after demonetization and after the introduction of GST, the economy has started moving towards the formal business rather than the informal business. So that too would have some credit to the buoyant revenues that we have today.
Mr. Bajaj, what do you expect to happen for the full year? Because there was a set of budget estimates and the entire sort of government's budget and calculations is based on that. But as we are heading towards the closure of the financial year, what sort of overall growth do you now expect as far as revenue is concerned?
So I'll break it into two parts, one direct taxes and indirect taxes. On the direct taxes, I would say as of today, the growth is a little over 24% on net basis, which means after refunds. And the refunds have really grown very robustly. We are up by 65% year on year as of date. And the gross revenue is up by a little more than 30%. So I would say as the year goes by, the next 4 months, the refunds should stabilize. So the revenue growth on the direct taxes would be somewhere between 27 to 30%. That's my estimate as of today, based on the revenues that are coming to us. And if that happens, that would be almost 3.5 lakhs and above, more than what we had budgeted for in the direct tax revenues. On the indirect taxes, to explain to you in a little detail, we had reduction of excise duties twice, November once and then May this year. Because of that, we were anticipating less of excise duty. Similarly, customs duty were also reduced a number of times to bring down the effect of inflation on edible oils and on pulses. So, but in spite of what we have done, I feel that on these two fronts also we'll meet our budgeted targets. In fact, in customs, we might exceed the budgeted targets a bit. On GST, we have been doing well, and I think that would continue. So if you are able to have an average of 1,50,000 crores or thereabout, which we are close to about 149 at the moment, and good days are going to come now. So if you're close to 150, I think we would also exceed the indirect tax target by a good 70,000 to 1 lakh crores. So overall, the revenues should see a robust growth this year, much higher than the GDP growth, to emphasize, because some people say that this is because of inflation. On a nominal GDP, which includes inflation, last year the direct taxes buoyancy was 2.5 times. This year also I feel it should be close to about 2 times, so which is a very good buoyancy, and the credit goes to, I think, everybody in the chain, right from the political bosses to the last man on the field who's working to ensure that good revenues come to the government.
Since you say that the credit goes to everyone, I would say that the credit should also go to the taxpayer.
Of course.
4.25 lakh to 4.5 lakh crore over and above, as far as the entire revenue is concerned, both the direct and the indirect side, is a very significant achievement. But Mr. Bajaj, a lot of people and industry chambers have also petitioned the Finance Ministry as part of the pre-budget discussions that it is time to provide income tax relief to the middle class. What is your own view on that?
I would say that we have done a lot of reforms on the direct taxes. The corporate tax have been brought down to 22%, and new manufacturing units that are set up to 24 March will only pay 15% tax. So that's a good, it's stabilized. Maybe some reforms are needed on the personal income tax also, because the tax rates go up from 5% to 30%, and then there are a number of surcharges there, and a lot of exemptions are there. So maybe we need to tinker with some of these provisions. It may give relief to some people and may not give relief to some other people. But yes, there is a need to simplify the tax rates. There is a need to simplify the process of the personal income tax. Now, if they say a relief, I don't know what exactly CII means in terms of relief, because if you look at tax to GDP ratio for our country, we are still very low, and there's a need to have more taxes. But yes, I agree to this front, and I am of strong view that our taxes should not come from increasing the tax rates, but from expanding the tax base. So our effort should be there. So all these efforts in capital gains tax also, we need to do something on that. If we do all that, I think it will give relief to some people and also ensure simplification of tax rates.
The specific suggestion was with regard to cutting the income tax for the Aam Aadmi or the middle class, and therefore putting more money in the hands of consumers. Although there is obviously a debate whether more surplus income goes into savings in India, or does it go into increased expenditure, because we also have other data which suggests that when left with some more surplus income, a lot of Indians are now headed to the stock market, sip by sip, step by step. Since you spoke about the capital gains point, and this is being talked about earlier also during the year, what is the meaning of, for the benefit of our viewers, what would this approach imply, where you, and just now you also spoke about the need to fix capital gain on various asset classes, because there is a divergent approach which has built up over the years. What would you recommend as the approach?
Okay, before I answer that, I'll also supplement my previous answer, because you had put a supplementary there. I think also we need to understand that not too many people in India pay taxes. While the returns filed may be going up, but there's a large proportion of people who file their returns up to the limit, say up to 5 lakhs or 6 lakhs, 6.5 lakhs, 7 lakh, up to which there are no taxes payable by them. So this would constitute about 70 to 75% of the taxpayers. So I would say that, and the middle class numbers in this country is much larger than, say, 1.5 crore. So I think I just wanted to also bring that perspective into that. On the capital gains, what you have said is very right. For example, today we have various asset classes, and even within the same group, say financial assets, somebody says that if you put in debt mutual funds or you put in debt directly, it is capital gains are different in the two cases, and there is a demand from the industry or from the capital market that we need to bring uniformity into this. So I think there have been various articles which say in some cases we get benefit of indexation, in others we don't get benefit of indexation. In some cases, as I told you, for 1 year, it's 1 year and below is short term, 1 year and above is long term. In some cases, 3 years and above is long term, below that is short term. So I think there's a need to think about it, simplify this so that there is no arbitrage created between financial products because there's a tax advantage. The product should sell based on its strength rather than on the tax arbitrage. So today, maybe we have created those tax arbitrage. I just read it in the papers that the industry is also saying that there's a difference in taxation between ULIPs and mutual funds. So all these things, corrections, if they are made, I think that will make it much more stable and much more progressive than what we have today.
Corrections in one go or spread out over time?
This is something which the budget makers will decide this time. I'm not part of the budget making exercise, but if you ask me my own opinion, I would say that if you're doing a correction, you should do whole stock rather than doing it bit by bit, so that there is clarity, because people who are coming into the capital markets are also big people, FIIs, FPIs, the mutual funds. So they should know in the long term that this is what the regime is going to be, and this is going to be stable for the next 10, 15, 20 years.
What about, and you spoke about it, I just want to take that point forward, short term versus long term. Ideally, from a policy planning point of view and to encourage savings and wealth creation, I believe government has that objective also to look forward to. A time-related differential may be argued against. For many years, it's been argued for. Do you think this time differential should go?
The whole idea of the time was kept because you wanted to differentiate between an investor and a speculator. So somebody who's coming into the market and doing a small trade and then moving out. He gives liquidity to the market. He's a very important player in the market. But at the same time, whether he should be getting the same benefits or not is something which a decision needs to be taken. So I would say that while you are framing your policy, you can bring in new concepts, but this is generally the concept that is there in the capital gains where you try and differentiate. For example, last year I recall the housing market had come to me and said that for houses also we should have the long-term capital gains kicking in after 12 months. And my simple question to them was that do we purchase houses to keep them for a year and then sell them off? So suddenly there was a silence in the room. Mm-hmm. So I would say you have to keep all these aspects, and what you say is right. I need these players who come for very short while, especially in the financial market and the equity market, because they provide liquidity. But I also want people for the long term because they give stability to returns, they give stability to the market. So how do I incentivize is a decision we need to take. But at this point of time, I think rather than going whole stock and barrel and rethinking or reinventing the wheel, if we can take certain things for given and then make changes so that it is simple to implement, simple to understand, and people invest because the product is good or product is not as good, but not because there's a tax advantage.
That's a good point about not allowing arbitrage to be the only point. Stepping out of the specifics from a broader sort of policy approach point of view, the government over the last 2 decades has now gone into a mode where several parts of our economic policy are regulated in the sense that there are independent regulators. Taking that into account, suppose there were to be such changes that the administrators are thinking, would it not make sense for a public discussion paper to be put out for people to offer you and the government specific opinions, rather than just sort of announce it on one particular day and then there is knee-jerk reaction as you yourself have dealt with and then dealt with clarification subsequently, because in the time that people hear something and they read the fine print, a lot of havoc happens. Could that not be an approach that could be explored? I'm not asking you about capital gains, but a broader...
Yeah, I'll answer you in the context of capital gains itself. I completely agree with you. So I have no arguments that we should not do it like that, because we should also consult. They are an important stakeholder for us. They are the ones who are paying taxes, as you had pointed out. So if you recall, immediately after the budget announcement last year, I had made this statement about capital gains, thinking that it will generate a debate. I'll have a few papers on my table which will give me suggestions as to what should be done. But somehow that did not happen because there are varying interests that play, and it may be very difficult for any body to come with a consensus view of their people as to what the government should do. So at times they leave it to the government. So, but I completely agree with you, and I would say there are some small steps that the department has also taken in this regard. If you see, we have just come up with this single form, income tax form. Now there'll be two forms. One is from ITR 1 to 6, there'll be one, and ITR 7 separate. And it has never happened in the history of what I have been told in the income tax department that we may have ever consulted the taxpayer. This time we have put it in the public domain, asked for comments within a month's time, and I'm sure the people who are doing it, the officers who are doing it, will have a look at that, and they give very good comments, and many a times we make changes based on those comments. Let me also say this, I have dealt with it as a policy. When we did the retrospective taxation, we came up with a small legislation which was there. But then the rules had to be framed, and the devil lies in the details, the devil lies in the rules. So I can undo in a legislation through the rules itself. So those rules also, I was very categorical that we should consult the stakeholders for whom this whole thing is built. I should not tell them that you have to run the Himalayas in 24 hours and only then will you get this benefit that has been announced. So what you're saying is absolutely right, and more I think the department will keep doing that. But there are some things that we can't do it.
This is good news, and I would wish all the officers who are doing it and the policymakers to continue to do that. But that also brings me to a connected point, the direct taxes code. I have asked you this question in earlier interviews. I am asking you again because I was reading your comments about the need for reforms. The DTC was promised to be a reform. Leave out the rate part and the slab part, but at least it would make the tax code more reader friendly in some ways. I don't know if all the changes of the finance bill were to be stacked up, how big a room or rooms it would fill, but not much is heard about the tax code. Why is it so, sir?
Okay, let me be very candid in answering that question, and I'll answer that in a longish manner. I completely agree with you. What I have understood about the income tax code is the first code came in 1860. I think it was rewritten in 1913 perhaps, if I'm right. Then in 1961. So there's been a gap of 50 to 60 years. Within that 50 to 60 years, when we write the code, we write a very nice code without any complications. But complications arise with each budget because there are various interests and various needs also that we need to take into account.
And a legislative requirement of the finance bill level.
Yeah. So 1961, I agree with you that the time has come for writing the code, because then we can remove this 20 provisions to a section which nobody can understand. So now I think as a process, the legislative process itself has become a little more contentious and difficult. Whenever you make a change, some people will be benefited, some will not be benefited, or some will be affected adversely. Because if I have a benefit that I have got or a provision in my favor in the act and it goes away, it will affect me. So I think bringing consensus, consulting people does take a time. I'm sure it will happen, and we hope that it happens sooner than later. But I agree with you that the time for that perhaps has come.
Okay, we'll look forward to that. Let me also talk about one of the sort of reforms that was announced, but we haven't heard much about it. This is the alternative scheme for personal individual taxpayers. Depending on which side of the debate you stand, somebody would say it's bombed. Somebody would say, well, you know, there are still so many exemptions, people didn't find it comfortable. I ask you to set the record straight on this subject. What happened to that scheme? Because I don't know anyone in my circle who has opted for that.
There are some people who are opting for it. The numbers I don't have exactly now, but the numbers are very small. Let me be very candid with you. And when you analyze it, you find that a large number of people in India or who file returns show income of less than 7.5 lakhs. Maybe this number would be 75 to 80% of the people who file returns. Now, if I file a return like that, then under the new scheme, my tax kicks in at 2.5 lakhs, while under the old scheme, I don't have to pay any tax on it. So there is no reason that I should move to the new. So what you have said obliquely, I'll say it absolutely clearly is that there's a need to relook at this whole scheme and come out with a scheme which has got less number of exemptions and maybe larger slabs, and the rate which doesn't shoot up from say 5 to 20 but moves gradually. And I think if we do that, there'll be a large number of people who will opt for it, and maybe at some stage the government can also think of, rather than having two options, have only one option.
Okay, that's a good approach. Let me also take up another point, which is GST. GST now, after 2017, there have been so many sort of reforms to the original concept. The practice has changed. A lot of difficulties have also been removed, and you spoke about the overall numbers. On the ground, sir, GST, if you were to evaluate it today, what kind of change do you see it having brought to our overall economy?
One thing is that it has brought in a lot of discipline in the financial dealings of the sectors. Be it corporate sector was anyway there, but the small and medium and the individual proprietor partnership. For example, if you are supplying your goods to say, if I take just a name of a company, ITC or Hindustan Unilever, you will not be able to do it unless you're a GST player yourself. So that has brought in some discipline that if I want to do business with you, I have to be GST compliant. So that is the reason that the numbers of assessees that were just 70 lakhs in 2017 have gone over 1.4 crores now. So that's bringing in
It's doubled.
It's doubled. So the benefit doesn't come only in one way. The benefit comes in all ways. So these people have got formalized. They are showing their business income. They are showing their P&L and balance sheet very sincerely. Once they do that, then the income tax also has a benefit of that, because then you also have to ensure that your income tax return matches with your GST return. So all that helps the economy, and there's more white economy that is there today than maybe it was there before the GST days. And it also helps the businesses. I recall when before 17 or many years since I've come into service, especially the foreigners would come and say that your tax system is a maze. I can't understand. I move 10 kilometers and it's a different rate. There's a different process. So all that has also been eased out. So ease of doing business, getting the right money for the government, people paying the right taxes and being comfortable, and also ensuring that there's a matching of what figures you give to various agencies, MCA, CBDT or CBIC or the GSTN network. There is a matching of those figures, and if it is not being matched, then AI and ML is being used and you are being asked questions. So it has brought in this kind of a discipline, and we are now moving towards a very formal economy where the tax base would also go up, and there'll be no difference between if I'm doing a business or you're doing a business. Both of us have to follow the same rules, the same principles.
What are the drawbacks of the GST according to you?
I would say we still have a lot of things to rectify in that. In some cases where there's inverted duty, we find the manufacturer in our country would not be as comfortable, the trader might be. So we always have this conflict of interest, and there are a large number of items on which we have rectified in the 45th and the 47th meeting, but there are some items that are still left out. And then there's a desire of some bodies or some companies or some categories to be out of this net and seek exemptions for their products. So that is also one thing which we need to gradually remove so that these arbitrages go away. And one of the arbitrages that we did away was with the pre-packaged goods in the last system. Then the third is that there are some people who are still worked up on the number of rates we have and the litigation that we have. So there is also a need to have a relook at all this. Right now, basically, though people say that there are 6, 7 rates, but I say there are basically 3, 5, 12 and 18. 28 only has 28 or 29 items, and the remaining 0 or 3 are special category. So maybe there is also a need to look at whether this also can be shrunk into, and one rate could go away, so that it, again, the difference between similar products is not there, and they fall into one category rather than different categories.
Do you feel that the 18% levy on a lot of service items is onerous? For example, and this is something which is of concern and a lot of people have commented about, is that any Indian who takes insurance, and we are an underinsured country on a population basis, for every annual premium you pay 18%. So if I'm insuring my health or my life, and COVID, we have seen what it has done to people, you still have to pay 18%. Don't you think 18% is too much?
We can argue on either side. I'll give you another example. For example, telecom services. And telecom services are also serving the poor very well. They are part of their livelihood. But there also we charge 18%.
But the ticket size is lower, so the unit economics would be different. I mean.
Obviously it would be different, but right now the insurance is basically being taken by a certain class of people. There may be a case, it can be discussed in the council meeting to reduce. It has actually been discussed a few times, but the council did not find merit in reducing the rate. So I would not jump the gun and say that it is required. So they have considered, because ultimately you also have to see what are the areas from where you are getting revenues. For example, on air travel, it is still 5%. On restaurants, it's 5% without ITC.
Which is precisely my point,
But
sir.
it is without ITC. So
Right.
I would also say that the restaurant industry also comes to us and says, please raise it to 12% with ITC or raise it higher. So there are various interests of how people operate in this arena that they keep asking for it. Maybe there is a case or there is not a case, but I think that we need to have faith in the collective wisdom of the council, where all the ministers and the union finance ministers sit down and take decisions, and that is based on some analysis that is done at the officers level from these states and center also. So I think...
A quick point, should we also retain our faith, for example, on petroleum or alcohol still being out of GST despite so many years having passed?
So it's only 5 years that have passed. The history of a country or history of finances or history of taxation is very, very long. And I don't know, when you read history, you also read Chanakya times that there was taxes. There is a time, I think, once the states and the center, we realize that GST is serving its purpose, that revenues are going up, that there is no cascading effect, the industry is also benefited. I think the time for all of this would come. You must have noticed it yourself. When I joined here about a year and a half or a little more than that ago, there was a lot of noise on GST. People didn't like GST. States were also very aggressive on GST. But I find there's a massive change in the attitude of people in the last year and a half. So maybe in a year's time or 2 years' time, we'll see your wishes coming true.
Mr. Bajaj, I end this interview to tell our viewers that you're hanging up your boots after, well, what, over 35 years in government?
Yeah, if you ask me, all in the government 34 years, otherwise 36 years.
36 years. What lies next for you?
So let's see. I'm here, you are here, your media is here, we'll see.
All the very best, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time with us today. With that, it's a wrap on this conversation with Tarun Bajaj, the outgoing Union Revenue Secretary. Several headlines here. Do keep tuned in. Goodbye.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.